I should remind any unfortunate soul that might actually be listening that I am going to repeat myself. I'm most probably going to contradict myself on multiple occasions, maybe even in the same video. And speaking of contradictions, I wanted to mention an exception. I'm aware they exist, and one of the most prolific, typically female villain archetypes used in media are witches. Well, they are usually balanced by some sort of good witches, so it's not that they are just solely, purely evil, but for example, in one of my guilty pleasures, Hansel and Gretel movie from 2013, there are some just evil villains who get mercilessly slaughtered. They get exactly what they deserve. Unfortunately, they can't exactly be called characters since, let's face it, it's not exactly a very good movie, and those witches don't exactly have a story to tell. But yes, this is one of those archetypes that do exist and that are used in a way that I do find satisfactory in terms of villainy. In general, yes, classical fairy tales do offer some amount of decent-ish female antagonists. Unfortunately, as of late, they are suffering from a series of unwanted remakes that do their absolute best to de-villainize these characters and twist them into one of the mutations I have mentioned, namely the misunderstood sympathetic villain, which is something that I definitely grew tired of over the time, and especially during the last 2 years, I would say. Of course, that the witches are bad has deep ties to our own history and could be delved much deeper into if that was what I wanted to do with these videos, but it's not. I do understand why they are portrayed that way in fairy tales, and it's not what I want in my stories at all. I just wanted to point out that it's an exception that exists. This whole there are no proper female villains, quote unquote, sub story of mine, and how I would like to, again, quote unquote, fix it with my non-existent writing skills is something that I wouldn't have even noticed a few years ago, but a deep and concentrated systemic brain I meant reading of Korean novels in the past 2 years opened my eyes to this issue question mark. I just want them, the female villains, to be evil and competent, then either get what they deserve or get away with it. Villain, in my not exactly worth much opinion, should be a character, a real being that inhabits the universe that I set up. The villain should have stories to tell, but I don't want a sympathetic villain, misunderstood villain, or a victim turned perpetrator because I simply don't believe in whatever that tries to say to me in a story. When that happens occasionally, that's fine, but when it's a rule, I think that's not exactly what I'm looking for in a villain, an antagonist, because I feel that it somehow diminishes the value of said antagonist as the polar opposite of protagonist, and this obviously applies to both female and male antagonists that I would like to create. What I truly want is for the world around them that I am able to create to acknowledge that what the antagonist is doing is wrong and evil, no matter the reasons for doing so, the antagonist still should always remain that evil villain. And then I need to ask myself if that's even something that's possible to make, to create true evil of both genders that the protagonist is supposed to overcome or fail in trying to do so. Because in my stories, I think that the protagonist should be allowed to lose to the villain as long as the protagonist still fits my own definition of that term. It should be allowed to happen because I want my antagonists to be competent. I want them to be able to compete with the protagonist on equal grounds, or even be superior to them, both in terms of physical ability, thinking ability, skills, training, effort put into them, and it should not matter if they are male or female. What I think an antagonist should arouse in the reader is understanding, not sympathy. Their actions should have meaning, should have, from the point of view of me as the reader of the story, reason for them to do the things they do and make the decisions that do, but I shouldn't be trying to find excuses for them. The lines between good and evil are more and more blurry in our recent stories, and to an extent that's fine, but I would like to avoid this complete disconnect with what's supposed to be evil and what's supposed to be good. And I want both genders in my stories to be able to commit either one of those regardless of their predispositions that I would impose on them based on our own real world rules and physical or mental abilities that are definitely present in our world, but I don't think they have a place in a completely different universe. So, to the best of my meager abilities, I would like to avoid making characters that are just somewhere in between, and because at the end of the day, what I want is to make myself, no one else, happy with a story that does not have any of the elements that I find so disturbing to my enjoyment. Not for anyone else in any way, shape, or form. I just want to create characters that check my boxes. That's it. Now, Asterix, I've already again stepped way over the line. Hopefully, I'll be able to finish with the battle reaching crescendo, Asterix in hot cart chase scene, and Numeromis suffering under the soles of Amonbofis' feet. We are reaching the conclusion to this grand epoch-shattering story. Now back to the kung fu scene, poking fun at movies like Crouching Tigers, Hidden Dragons. Numeromis attempts to run up a pillar, which the potion allows him to. Meanwhile, Amonbofis does the same, rotating in the air, ending in a split between two of those pillars. Numeromis asks how is he going to get up, and he just does, because physics and laws of gravity and the way our bodies are structured mean absolutely nothing in the face of the Panoramix's potion and this movie's script. Numeromis attempts to negotiate and offers Amonbofis to cooperate with him on the construction of the palace, but for Amonbofis, Numeromis is just a cockroach that he's not going to cooperate with as a self-proclaimed lion. Then they attempt something of a superhero-ish Smash Brothers attack, jumping into the air with their hand outstretched. land on one of the pillars in struggle, and Numeromis ends up with his feet dangling above the air, with Amonbofis holding his neck. He then retracts his hand, and for a moment, comedic one, Numeromis is still standing in the air before Amonbofis shrugs his shoulders and nods at him, indicating that he should just fall, which he immediately afterwards does. Numeromis falls, and Amonbofis follows, but then Numeromis has the hero moment. He recalls the villain's words, Lion refusing to cooperate with a cockroach, and kicks Amonbofis in the chest, sending him flying through multiple walls until he is planted into a wall profile wise, even in the correct posture that most of the hieroglyphs of Egypt have. He then asks Amonbofis, "Who's the lion now?" And Amonbofis says, "Say it to me from profile if you are a man." The chase continues, and finally Asterix arrives at the city where Malacoxis, who's the person who Numeromis was building a house for at the beginning of the movie, apprehends him in an attempt to drag him to Cleopatra, which is exactly what Asterix wants. There is a scene where the Roman soldiers finally catch up to him, only to see the empty cart, realize that he is gone, and they just proceed to give up, and one of the soldiers puts on reverse and starts backing up with the horse-drawn mini carriage as if he was reversing with a car. In the palace, Cleopatra and her courtesans are playing some sort of a game of predictions. The predictions turns out to be a message and a loved one. Then Malacoxis and Asterix arrive. Asterix proceeds to push Idefix to deliver the message, which one of the courtesans comments on as here is the message, and Cleopatra looks at Asterix and that one courtesan that he was interested in and says, and here is the loved one. Cleopatra then reads the message and properly enraged tells Asterix to go, that she is going to resolve this by herself, and asks the courtesan Gimikis to send him off to allow for some private time for the two of them. Then they get a scene hidden by a curtain where she points Asterix in the correct direction and then gives him the kiss that's in her name, which in the setting of this movie gives him the same boost as the strengthening potion would. And then we are finally back at the construction site, which is where I'm going to stop. And next time, I'm definitely going to finish Asterix, and I'm not going to spend 8 minutes rambling about an issue that I actually don't know anything about.